Good morning. All right, if you want to all stand with me, I'm just going to pray as we get started. Yeah, I heard that somebody saying, "We're stretch it out." So, God, we just thank you that we are here once again. God, whether we are actually physically here in this building or in our homes, God, I just pray that you would help each one of us right now to forget everything else but you. God, would you just help us to focus on you? And would all the fears and the joys and the stresses of life just fall to the side as we look to you and as we listen to you, God. And we want to live our lives that way. But it's not always possible to do that because we do have to face so many different things. But God, right now, we just are asking you to pour in strength. We're asking you to speak to us clearly, God. Would you just give us... as we turn our attention to you, would you turn your attention to us as it always is on us, and that you would just speak to each one of us individually exactly where we are. Help us to hear you, God. Anyone in here, anyone at home who's feeling like, I can't hear him. He's not speaking to me. I can't feel him. God, would you just change that today? God, would you just help each of us to sense your presence in a powerful and tangible way? We love you and we lift up this time to you. Amen.
Amen.
All right, you guys can take a seat. So you're going to have to help me this morning, okay? Are you guys ready for that?
Yeah.
All right, because I put this together yesterday, and things changed this week, as you just heard, with my mom and all that happened, and so things look very different this morning than we expected them to look a few days ago. And last week, if you were here, you will remember that we started out the year by preaching a sermon called Get Your Hopes Up. And it was all about how we need to get our hopes up. We need to set our expectations on good. We need to believe God for good. We need to be expecting good things to happen because it's so easy to expect the worst, right? And so, I came in all passionate and excited and like, yes, everybody needs to get our hopes up. And then our week turned out for the worst, even though we were expecting for the best. But I just want to kind of give a brief recap because the whole reason that we were looking at the fact that we need to have expectations for good is because, like I said, we can so easily expect the worst when things keep going badly, right? But the kingdom of hell, just like the kingdom of heaven, operates on what? Faith, yeah. So when we have faith, we can so easily think, oh yeah, I either have faith in God or yeah, I'm just kind of struggling to have faith in God. But what we don't realize is when we're not having faith in God, when we're not expecting God to show up, when we're not having faith in his goodness and his power and his purposes, then by default, and most of us would never, ever, ever want this, but by default, we end up actually putting our faith in Satan, in what he can do, in his plans, in his schemes, and in the destruction that he can cause. And we don't even recognize that because we just think, oh, well, these are just thoughts. We don't recognize how powerful our thoughts can be. And when we start to, with our thoughts, just expect, well, things keep going bad, so they're just going to keep going bad, and I'll just prepare myself for the fact that they're going to keep going bad, we're actually putting faith in Satan to show up and do what he wants to do in our lives. And it's so important that we recognize that God loves our faith and he's moved by our faith. But what happens when you're expecting the best and you're believing for the best and you're praying for the best and you're ready for the best and then the worst happens? Well, I'm here to tell you what happens. You see, the thing is, I had absolutely every expectation. And for years, it's been 3 years since my mom was first diagnosed with bladder cancer. And we kept praying for the best and hoping for the best and expecting the best and praying for the miracle and hoping for the miracle and expecting the miracle. And it just didn't come the way that we wanted it to. And it just hasn't come the way we expected it to. And it just kept getting worse. And so I kind of kept going to God and saying, okay, so what do we do in this situation? And what's so interesting is I had not planned on making last week's message a 2-part series. But what we looked at last week was the story of Elijah, remember? Elijah's this prophet. He comes in a really, really tough time when the nation of Israel has pretty much turned its back on God, the nation has been divided. You have King David comes, everything's great. His son Solomon comes, things are looking pretty good. By the end of Solomon, it's starting to look bad. Then the nation's divided. Sounds kind of like our country right now, but it's divided into the north and the south. And you have these two divided, now you've got the north and the south, Israel and Judah. And Elijah and some other prophets start coming at this time, and they're saying to everybody, hey, these nations, not only are they divided against each other, they've also turned their back on God. And now they are worshiping, instead of worshiping this God who has been so faithful to them time and time and time again, they start to worship these false idols. And at the time of Elijah, there's King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, and Jezebel is a Canaanite. So she convinces the whole of Israel to actually start worshiping the false god Baal. And so there's prophets and there's all these people who come and who are worshiping this false god. And Elijah comes in at that time, and he's sent by God. He's a prophet sent by God to say, hey, turn back to God. Turn your attention back to God. Turn your attention to the only true God. Like, do you guys not realize you're actually worshiping a false, like he's not real? This is just Satan, like, messing with you. And so this is what he's doing. He's got this really tough job, and they aren't listening, and they aren't listening. And actually, King Ahab and Jezebel are going after Elijah. They're trying to kill him. But then, if you remember from last week, Elijah comes in, there's a drought, there's a 3-year drought, gets really bad. Elijah announces it, and he says, until I announce, that God announces through me that the drought is over, it's going to keep going. So after 3 years, God says, okay, the drought's going to be over. But first, he sends Elijah to prove how powerful he is. And Elijah calls out 450 of the prophets of Baal, and he says, okay, we're going to see which God is more powerful. And so they build an altar to their God, and he doesn't show up. And Elijah's actually pretty, like, bold with them, and he's like, hey, where's your God? Come on. And he's taunting them. And then, do you remember? He sets up the altar that had been destroyed, and he sets up this huge altar to God. He puts an offering on it, and then in the middle of a drought, he gets them to pour water all over it, and then he calls God, and God burns up the offering, burns up all the water, and everybody's like, wow, okay, the God of Israel is real. And then we look, then they're waiting, the rain still hasn't come. He said the rain was going to come, but he's like, hey, I hear the rain coming, even though there is no rain. There's no cloud in the sky, it says. And then he's the one where he sends Ahab off. He's like, go eat because the rain's coming. And then he's on his knees praying, and he keeps sending his servant out 7 times. Are there any clouds? Are there any clouds? And the servant keeps coming back. There's no clouds, until eventually on the 7th time, there is one cloud the size of a man's hand. And that one cloud the size of a man's hand is enough for Elijah to go, it's coming. The rain's coming. Go, run. Like, get on your chariots, King Ahab, and go. So this man, do you see how full of faith he is? I mean, he's like not scared of 450 prophets of Baal. And what we don't realize is even though the prophets of Baal are, you know, they were worshiping a false god, do you know that actually like they could make supernatural things happen? They could weird witchcraft things could happen. And so these are like scary people. And by the way, the King Ahab, king of Israel, and his wife, they hate him. And yet he is so bold that he goes up and he taunts them. And this is such a bold man, and he has faith, and he calls out faith even when there's no rain. And he has so much faith. But then what's so interesting, that's where we ended last week, is that we just need to have that faith even when we don't see the clouds. And we wait for the clouds to come. We wait for the rain to come. We believe it's going to come. God's rain of refreshing. Amen. But what happens, literally, there's not even a pause. What happens right after that, we're going to pick up in 1 Kings chapter 19. So last week we read 1 Kings chapter 18. This week we're looking right after what just happened. What's so interesting is, I'm going to read it for you, but right at the beginning, Ahab ends up telling his wife Jezebel what happened, and she's now angry. And so we'll read about that in a second. But what's so interesting is this one woman who has been going after him already. Like, she's been chasing him down. This is not new that she hates him. But now suddenly she's like, I'm going to kill you. And that one thing just puts Elijah over the edge. And he's like, I can't do this anymore. And it reminds me of months and months ago. You might remember I preached a sermon about, it was Daniel 7. And we were talking about this word oppression that Satan goes after, and he oppresses God's people. And that word oppression in Aramaic is actually the word bala, and it just means to wear down or to harass constantly. And I feel like that's what happened with Elijah. It was like he's got so much faith, he's got so much boldness, he's got so much expectation that God will show up and the rain will come and everything's going to be okay. But what's the thing that ends up taking him down? It's the same thing that's been happening. He just gets worn down. He just gets overwhelmed. How many of you have ever felt like that? Like the smallest, you're going along, you're trying to keep faith, and then suddenly the smallest thing happens and it just puts you over the edge and you're just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm so tired. I can't keep up. God's not listening. God's not, whatever that might be. And that's exactly what happens to Elijah. You see, the devil's goal is to wear us down, and he'll do anything to get us to a point where we want to give up and when we stop listening to God. So let's read in 1 Kings 19, verses 1 through 9. So it says, and remember, this is right after all these miracles just happened. It says, now Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed by the way, he killed all the prophets after they failed. Little note there. And how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. So again, here's this guy. He's seen the power of God. He's able to say there's a drought and there's a drought. He's able to say rain will come and rain will come. He's able to call God to come and send fire down from heaven. Like, this guy's so powerful. Oh, and then he goes and kills the 450 false prophets. Like, this guy is so bold, so powerful, so strong. And then this lady manages to just scare him by saying, hey, I'm going to come after you. It's so interesting. You see, Elijah, in that moment, he got so worn down that he lost sight of God. He lost sight of God's power. He lost sight of God's goodness. He lost sight of the fact that God had always shown up for him. Fear is brilliant at deceiving us. When fear comes in, when we partner, fear is going to come all the time, but when we actually choose to partner with it, when we give fear a voice in our minds and in our hearts, it can make us totally lose sight of God. And it can make us totally illogical. When we start to fear, all logic goes out. Because suddenly now we can become so overwhelmed, we can't even think straight. Let's continue. It says, when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then he lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for this journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, where he went into a cave and he spent the night. So do you remember last week how we spoke about how often God's provision is conditional, right? Often he kind of says to us, hey, all these things will be added onto you, but first he says, seek me first, right? Seek the kingdom of God first. There are so many times where he says, even to Abraham, he offers him so much, but he does say to Abraham, I need you to get up from your country and go. That's a big deal. We can kind of pass over that. But so often God is saying, even with our tithes, even with our giving, he's going, hey, will you test me in this? Well, what does it take to test God with our finances? Giving. We have to take the first step and give, right? And so there are so many times where God's provision is conditional. But I think God also knows when we just need his unconditional provision and his grace. And so that's exactly what we see here, is that God sees that Elijah is just at the end of himself. He's just done. And so God just provides food for him right there without anything, without Elijah asking. Elijah, in fact, wants to die, and God goes, no. Have you guys ever had God bake bread for you? Like, can you think how good that bread would be? You wake up and there's just like, I don't know, that'd be cool. I think it's these things that we pass over in the Bible where it's like, oh, yeah. But it's like, man, you guys, like, this is crazy stuff. It's awesome. The Bible is amazing. Anyway, so God knows when we have enough faith in us to be able to take a step that he needs us to take. He knows when we have that in us, and then he asks us for that. He says, hey, take that step of faith. Do that thing. But when we lose faith, and this is the first point, when we lose faith, God remains faithful. God remains faithful. And that doesn't mean he just remains faithful as in he remains, faithful himself and he follows up, but he also keeps his faith in you. You guys know that? Like, he has faith in you to be the kind of person that he created you to be. He's going, I know it's hard right now. I know it's hard right now, but I have faith in you. I have faith that you're going to be okay. I have faith that everything I created in you, it's going to come out. Like, you're going to be okay. I have faith that you can get up and take this next step. But when we lose faith, it's so important that we remember God is not up there disappointed in us and going like, oh man, I thought you were going to figure it out this time. He's up there as a good father. He's down here, actually. He's right here with us as a good father going, I've got faith in you. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I'm right here with you. But then it's really interesting that there are some really interesting things that we need to look at Elijah, and we need to say, okay, what are some of the things that he did that we do need to do, and what are some of the things that he did that we need to learn from? And the first one is that Elijah, if you notice, it says, Elijah left his servant, and then he went on by himself into the wilderness. And then it's in that wilderness that he sits down and he goes like, I just want to die. God, just take my life. I'm done. I'm no better than my ancestors. And that first thing that I want to say is that when hard things happen, reach out for support. You see, Elijah runs away from his support, so he's alone. Now, sometimes there's times where it's important to be alone. We often talk about how important it is to get alone with God, but that's not what Elijah was doing. He was not going out to seek God for answers and help. He was depressed. He was struggling. And in those times when you're struggling, you need to reach out for help. You need to reach out for support. God built us for relationships. Amen. He built us to take care of each other, to carry each other's burdens. There have been so many times where even this morning, I woke up and I said to Cody, I was like, I'm just hoping I can get through this morning without falling apart. And then I got a text from Philly saying, God woke me up early this morning so I could watch your sermon from last week. And I'm so excited, and I'm praying for you. And just that little bit of encouragement, you guys, you have no idea what it means to people when you take the time to show up, to text, to send a card, all of you have probably been in that situation where you need it. And all of you have probably been in that situation where you give it. And we underestimate how much our support actually means when people are struggling. We underestimate what it means. And you might think, oh, I don't want to bother them or whatever. But it's like you underestimate how much that means to people. So really want to encourage you, when you are going through hard things, reach out for support. We're supposed to carry each other's burdens. It actually reminds me, Cody was just reminding me of this the other day, actually. His uncle, Mark, how many times now? He's done like 3 times? So he ran Badwater race. Have you guys ever heard of the Badwater race? Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy. So he's run that 3 times. I'm going to read to you what it is because it's crazy. Okay, so he runs the Badwater 135. So covering 135 miles nonstop from Death Valley to Mount Whitney, California. The Badwater 135 is the most demanding and extreme running race offered anywhere on the planet. The starting line is at Badwater Basin in Death Valley, which marks the lowest elevation in North America at 280 feet below sea level. The race finishes at Whitney Portal, which is 8,300 feet above water, which is the trailhead to the Mount Whitney Summit, which is the highest point in the United States. So Badwater 135 course covers 3 mountain ranges for a total of 14,000 feet. So it's intense. And so Mark runs this, but every runner of Badwater has to actually gather a crew of people who go with them because they run sometimes for like 30, 35 hours. And so they have to have a crew of people. And so Cody and his brother-in-law Skylar did this for Mark 1 or 2 times. And what they would do is they have everything prepped. They have a vehicle with water and food and whatever he might need and medical supplies and whatever. And they would take turns. One of them would, often run with him, and then they'd go a mile, stop the car, get ready for him. When he gets there, give him water, give him whatever, like every mile the whole way. And they have this crew. And it's so important that every single runner has a crew. They cannot do it without a crew. And that's where it just reminded me, all of us need our Badwater crew. All of us need those people that when we're running the race, and when we're going through the desert, and when we're going through the places where it's like, just hard, and life is just hard, and we're just running our race, we need that crew who's going to be there to give us water and to stop us and say, hey, do you need that really quick 10-minute nap? Do you need food? What do you need? Like, let me help you. Let me run with you. Let me give you that support. As he's like, getting delusional and can't keep up anymore, he needs somebody by his side going, okay, we can do this. We can do this. What do you need? Making sure that he is staying strong. Amen. Sometimes you need to be willing to ask for your crew. You see, Mark could have just like, oh, I feel weird asking someone. That's a lot to ask, It's a lot to ask, somebody to come and be with you for like 3 days, and it's strenuous for the crew, and they're staying up all night. And so he could have been like, oh, I don't want to ask anyone. But then he would have never made it. He would have never made it through that race. So sometimes we all need to humble ourselves enough to go, hey, I need my crew right now. I need to gather people. I need to ask for help. And we need to all be wise enough to recognize those times in our life where we're going, I'm struggling. I need to ask for help. I need a crew. But we also sometimes, a lot of the times, need to be the crew for other people, right? We need to be aware that there are some people who are struggling, and we need to step out. We need to be there for them. We need to make sure that we show up. We need to make sure that we check in on people. And sometimes we go like, well, I don't even know when people need help. But you have access to the God who does know. So will you just like make a commitment to start asking God, hey, God, is there anyone I need to reach out to today? And he'll put people on your heart. You may not know that there's something going on with them, but he'll say like, hey, just send a text. And you'd be surprised how many times I've sent random, texts or calls, and people are like, wow, I just really needed that right now. We need to be the crew for other people. But what's so interesting, Cody said, is the crews are all told beforehand. It is so important, and you all need to hear this, and I need to hear this. It is so important as the crew that you take care of yourself first. Because they said more often than having to come in and help the runners, we have to come in and help the crews. Because the crews are the ones who are so focused on the runner that they end up not eating, they end up not taking a nap, they're not actually trained to run this race. And yet they're so busy focused on their runner that they don't take care of themselves, and then they're the ones who get dehydrated. They're the ones who get heat stroke or whatever, and they have to be airlifted out, and then the whole thing's messed up anyway. And so you need to make sure that if you are someone's crew, that you're taking care of yourself first. Whether you're going through a hard time or you're helping someone through a hard time, which is all the time, right? Because life is hard. You need to make sure, and that's not a selfish thing. It's not like put yourself first. It's like if we don't, it's the airplane thing. If you don't put your mask on first for oxygen, you're not going to be able to help your kid, right? And so we need to all make sure that we are, and when I say take care of yourself, I mean things like you need to be in God's word. You need to be in prayer. You need to be making sure you're being filled up spiritually so you're ready to help other people. As we're wanting to help my mom, we have to make sure that we're not falling apart ourselves. Because if we fall apart ourselves, we're no good to anybody. Then we're just stressing out the whole family, right? And so we need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. And then it's so important. It's not just spiritually, it's also physically. What did God say Elijah goes and he takes a nap. He's having a bad day, and he lays under a tree and he takes a nap. And the angel's like, cool, take a nap, now eat some food. And then he lays down again, now eat some more food. So what I'm hearing is when you're having a hard time, just keep eating food, right? But honestly, like you guys, we underestimate the power of just physically taking care of ourselves. Like if you're having a hard day, take a nap, it's okay. Like if you are going through a hard, make sure that you're taking care, make sure you're eating, make sure you're exercising, make sure you're doing what you need to do, because guess what? You are not a superhuman. You're still we're not in eternity yet. We don't have our resurrected bodies yet. We need to make sure that we are physically eating healthy, taking care of ourselves, doing the things we need to do to be physically, emotionally, and spiritually healthy. We are triune beings, right? We need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and that's point number 2 if I didn't say it enough yet. When hard things happen, take care of yourself. Whether you're in crisis or you're helping someone else, this is so, so important. And then the third or the fourth thing is when hard things happen, listen for the Lord. What's so interesting here is that Elijah's there. He's so discouraged. I mean, he's so discouraged, like illogically discouraged considering his life. And the angel comes, feeds him, so he takes care of himself. You know, he makes sure that he gets what he needs. And then it says he goes on for 40 days and 40 nights, and eventually he gets to, I think it was Hebron. And it says, the Lord said, this is 1 Kings 19:11. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face. He went out, and he stood at the mouth of the cave. When we are going through hard things, we need to make sure that we are listening for the Lord. But what's so interesting is like God doesn't, here's Elijah, he's a mess, he's afraid, he's suicidal, like he's done. He doesn't want to do this anymore. And what God does is he's like, hey, he gives him enough, and then he sends him on a 40-day and 40-night journey. And what's interesting is he does keep talking to him. So what's the whole gentle whisper about? Because it even says, like, the Lord said, go listen. So it's really about, in that moment, God's been talking to him all the way along. He tells him what to do. He's whispering. So we need to be listening for what God is saying to us. But then in that moment, he doesn't go to Elijah and say, Elijah, snap out of it. He doesn't go to Elijah and say, Elijah, you have nothing to worry about because I'm about to take Jezebel down. He doesn't go to Elijah and say, like, let me give you this pep talk. Let me tell you, no, you're saying that you're not as, you're as bad as your ancestors. You're not, you're fine, buddy. He's not doing that. What does he do? He shows his power, and then he shows his peace. He shows his power. Like, have you, imagine that. Like, a wind comes that literally tears apart the mountain and breaks apart rocks. It's a lot of power. That's a big wind. And then the earthquake comes, and then the fire comes. And God's not in those things. He's just showing his power. He's just showing, like, I can do this stuff. I can do the power stuff. But I'm right here in the peace. Amen. I'm right here in the gentle whisper. And Elijah's been hearing him, but what he really needed was not just to hear him, but to actually, it says that the Lord passed by. Elijah needed his presence. Elijah needed God's presence. Because so often we can kind of get used to hearing God's voice and listen, and listening for him or allowing him to speak to us through our thoughts. But we need to take the time out to go to the mouth of the cave, to step out of our discouragement or our confusion or our busyness or our distraction or whatever it is, to step out of that and just be in God's presence. If you want to keep your hopes up, If you've been keeping your hopes up and then they keep getting just rocked, thrown up against those rocks, get in God's presence. Allow yourself the time to get into his presence and ask him the questions and be there. He doesn't ridicule Elijah, right? He doesn't say to Elijah, what is wrong with you? You've seen my power. He just reminds him of his power. And then he speaks to him with a gentle whisper. He comes close enough so that Elijah can hear his whisper. It's funny, like I said, I only planned this yesterday, but this whole week, even before anything happened with my mom, I kept hearing the words, get close enough to hear his whisper. Get close enough to hear his whisper. And that's so important that we're getting close enough. See, right now, we can kind of just rely on church or rely on listening to messages or whatever to hear his voice, but we need to actually be those people who we get close enough to God where all the distractions are gone, where he can be whispering to us and we can actually hear him. That we're actually in his presence and we can actually hear him when there's noise and chaos and junk and confusion and we don't understand what's going on and we don't understand why the miracles aren't happening and we don't understand why things keep getting worse. And it's in those times that it's so important that we go and listen for the Lord and we get close enough to hear his whisper. And I just thought it was important to point out that God actually takes Elijah on a 40-day and 40-night journey just to get him to a place. He didn't need him to go to Hebron for anything except to show his power and to show his peace. That's it. And then he actually says, hey, go back the way you came. Then he sends him on his way, and it's like, go on to the next thing. Just keep going. It's like there was nothing profound that happened. He just says, okay, this is the next thing I need you to do. I need you to go anoint the new king. I need you to go anoint the next prophet. That's the next thing that he's told to do. And it's interesting to me that God takes him so far out, and he's speaking to him. He's telling him what to do. So it's not like the Lord just gets silent, but it's like he takes him so far out, and I think it's because he just needs Elijah to separate himself from the discouragement and all of that, and to just go and to get to a place where he's willing to see God's power and God's peace and be in his presence. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, that when we are feeling overwhelmed and when we need to keep our hopes up, and maybe you're at a place where all week you've been like, yes, I'm keeping my hopes up, I'm good. And this is just to say to you, keep that hope up. But make sure, whether you are at the top of your mountain and you're feeling really good, or whether you are in the valley going like, man, I keep feeling like I just keep rolling down this hill. Just keep in his presence. Make sure that you are staying in his presence. Make sure that you are reaching out for support. Make sure that you are taking care of yourself in those practical, silly ways. Oftentimes it's in the crisis that we think oh, that's so stupid. I'm just not going to eat. I don't feel like eating. Whatever it is. Make sure you're taking care of yourself and make sure that you are listening for the Lord. Amen. All right, we're going to go into a time of worship, and I'm just going to pray for us before we do that. God, you are so good. You're such a good God that even in the times where we want to give up on you, you never give up on us. Even in the times where we can struggle and question, you never question us. God, I'm so grateful for the fact that that I've been able to just not be afraid and just hold on to hope this week because of all the ways you've been faithful. You've just proven yourself again and again and again and again, and it doesn't mean that things are perfect, but you've just proven yourself so good. You've done so much for us already. God, would you help us to keep our eyes fixed on your power, but most of all, would you help us to lean in close enough to hear your whisper? God, the reality is that no matter what we face in this life, You are always with us. You are always good. And God, you have such a bright future for every single one of us. And so God, I pray that all of us, Lord, no matter what life is throwing at us right now, God, would you just help us to know your goodness? Would you help us to know your nearness? God, we thank you that we always have reason to hope. We love you so much. Amen.